Welcome back to the black hole of real estate. And today I want to talk about something that is kind of sliding under the radar right now, and I think that it's going to look different. It's the unrepresented buyer. And in years past, they were able to do it, and they can still do it. So nothing's changed there. But the way that it's going to work, I'm noticing that some things just might be different this time around. This is your host, Ron Weiss-Sakarski, and let's lead you into this conversation, which to me is really, really interesting. Many people have bought properties on their own without the help of a real estate agent. They've been able to put the offers together and work the inspections and the showings and the appraisals, all of those things. And it's been less of an issue because it's just been less of an issue. But now there's these BBAs, these buyer broker agreements, and the representation side. And it seems a little bit different. And I believe that going forward, it might just get a little harder, at least in the beginning, for an unrepresented buyer to actually buy a property on their own. And the first thing I might say, with regard to that, is that now an unrepresented buyer has to gain access to a property, on their own. So they can't have a buyer's agent open up a door and represent them, okay, and that's fine. But how many buyer's agents are going to go there, open up a door with no agreement in place, no compensation factor, but have the liability of possibly being asked a question with regard to real estate services? So without that agreement in place, it's something they can't do. And I know, just call the sign, just have a listing agent let you in and let them just show you the house and tell them you're an unrepresented buyer. It's an option for that listing agent to either open the door for you being unrepresented or not. And I'm not saying they wouldn't. But you're going to have to work as an unrepresented buyer on the listing agent's schedule. And they may or may not jump off the couch or leave a meeting or change their appointment schedule around to fit you in the time that's convenient for you. So that's more about scheduling. That's not about a denial of service, but maybe we'll just call it logistics. I think what you're going to find is, here's where the work comes in. That listing agent working for only the seller, only being compensated by the seller, is going to, at some point, be in the crux of real estate services. And if they're representing the seller, they've got a fiduciary responsibility to serve their best interests, and they have no fiduciary responsibility or service agreement with the buyer. So as we travel upon second showings, appraisals, inspections, negotiating inspections, writing the offer, all those things fall into real estate services. So the buyer is largely on their own, which they were in the past. But I think now that a listing agent, a seller, representing the seller, has to think a little, perhaps more carefully, maybe differently than before. What am I actually providing to move the transaction along versus actual real estate services? And this is going to play a little bit differently. And I feel that, buyers representing themselves, they're not allowed to have lockbox codes. There's a number of things that would have to travel through it. And I think what the biggest concern would be, and this is me just thinking it through, in a market such that we're in the last year, the fallout rate has been unprecedented. 25, 30, 35% of them. It's a number in that range of deals that go under contract and actually don't close. The vast majority of the times, it revolves around the inspections. So whether it's the 4-point inspection on the roof, the plumbing, the HVAC, electrical, something like that, those are pretty big ticket items. So there might need to be contractors going in and repairs done. So it's a lot of moving parts. And if there's no representation in place, the listing agent has to understand what is the difference between cooperating with the unrepresented buyer versus doing real estate work for someone they do not represent that might affect the person that they do represent. And as agents have always had to walk that fine line between, if they only represent one party, maintaining that fiduciary responsibility, it gets interesting. And then if you think about, let's just call it the proverbial hot property, and there's two offers on the table, and let's say they're similar, and there's one represented by an agent, a buyer's agent, and there's one that's unrepresented, and the seller only is represented by the seller's agent, and the seller's agent only works with the seller. So those two are clearly aligned. You have a different agent representing one buyer and nobody representing the unrepresented buyer. So as the owner of the property, the seller, is examining the offers, one of the things they'll have to take into consideration is, can this deal get to the closing table? You see, it's been demonstrated that the assistance of an agent may prove valuable in assisting with the numerous opening and closing of doors, logistics, scheduling, negotiations of inspections, walkthroughs, and anything else that might enter, insurance, anything else might enter into the contract to close process. So while the seller is examining multiple offers, it occurs to me that one of the conditions in terms of their signing it is going to be the ability of an unrepresented buyer to skillfully close the sale on their own and not have it fall out for any of the things that we just mentioned. And it's not to suggest in any way, shape, or form that an agent would navigate or manipulate a system such that an unrepresented buyer would have less opportunity. But the sellers have a choice too, and they've always had a choice to choose the offer and terms that they feel are most attractive to them and most important to them. You see, the deal has to make sense to the buyer, and it absolutely has to make sense to the seller. And if the buyer wants certain prices and conditions to purchase the home, the seller also wants some assurance, along with similar conditions and terms, that the deal can actually close. So we may be entering a time where the unrepresented buyer may be placing themselves knowingly or unknowingly at a disadvantage. I think the good news is a lot of people have been able to represent themselves for many, many years successfully. And I think the ones that are successfully doing it in the past will probably be just successful at doing it in the future. But it does occur to me, somebody who's inexperienced in the field of real estate or bought a house or two and feels that is a substitute for, years or even decades of training and experience, I think those accidental, self-represented, undertrained or underexperienced unrepresented buyers, they might find some difficulty in this market the way that it's behaving so far. In all reality, in a month or a year or somewhere in between, that will probably normalize itself. But for the moment, I'm just noticing that might be something that didn't readily pop up. But now that it has, I can't unsee it and unhear it. Which brings me back, to where we are. The buyer representation is a choice. It's always been negotiable, whether it's to use one or not. The fees involved, it's always been negotiable. And right now, more than ever, if you're an agent or a consumer, to me it doesn't matter. Is it possible that an agent, a well-trained, a highly trained agent, with a lot of transactional experience and negotiation experience and also navigation of a transaction experience, could that service be valuable in getting the home that you want at the price and terms that you want as a buyer? And also as a seller, do you want the comfort of knowing that the other side has representation, same as you've chosen to have? So I think it's going to be interesting. And I want to see how it plays out. I don't have a prediction for it. But as I notice something like that, it's pretty compelling. I want to make sure I share it with you. I want you to hear what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing in these masterminds, in these collaborations of the best agents that I know in the business. And suddenly, this is on the radar. This might be a thing. All right, so I hope that you got a little bit of knowledge out of what I'm seeing is going on with the unrepresented buyer in this new market of real estate. This is Ron Wojciechowski for the Black Hole of Real Estate.